So I just want to introduce you in a little bit to the people, although they have all information, and I had a very exciting message from people waiting, to hear this expert talk. And first of all, I would like to thank you for doing these expert talks for us, and I think it's a very great honor. We are a group and we are talking about creativity, and we are trying to do creative things and, think outside of the box. And I'm keep saying to the teachers that please try to do whatever you think. I mean, if you don't try, you will never know what will come from that. If you try, okay, you will fail, but it's okay. Even failure, it's nice sometimes.
Yeah, we learn from failure.
Yeah, we learn from failure. So I would like to thank you, and I would like to give you the floor, and we're really looking forward all to hear all the things that you have to talk. You will talk to us about creativity. And thank you once again, Bonnie, for that.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everybody. I am so honored and excited to be speaking to educators from so many different countries. I am an educator myself, have been for years, and I highly respect and value educators. And I'm excited about all of the different countries. I've been to many, but have not been to all. So I'm going to begin and talk to you about developing creativity in schools. And I have sent this PowerPoint presentation to Irene, and if she can share it with you however she can, I'm happy for you to have copies of it if you would like. And what I thought I would do, it's pretty long and we might not get through it all, but like you, as a teacher, I prefer to prepare too much rather than run out of things to do. And I wasn't sure what you knew, what you would be interested in. So I thought I'd begin, and then if you have questions, please interrupt me, because I'm very happy for us to discuss anything. And if you have a piece of paper or a couple of pieces of paper and some pencil or something, it would be nice, because there are some places where you might want to interact with some activities. Okay, so I'll begin, and this is about developing creativity in schools. First of all, I'll start by talking about what creativity is, and then why schools should develop it, and finally, some things about how you can develop it. So first of all, what is creativity? Well, most experts agree that creativity has to have two important components. It is the generation of novel or original ideas that are also useful. And if you think about it, if you come up with an idea that's not original, it may be very useful, it's a good idea, but we don't call it creative. Or if you come up with an idea that's novel and original, but it's not useful, it might just be bizarre. For example, you could walk into your classroom upside down on your hands, and that would be pretty novel, but I don't know if it would be a useful way. Maybe if it would get the students' attention, but otherwise, that wouldn't necessarily be a useful thing. Oops, I don't know why I did that. Okay. Creativity, like intelligence, is evidenced in all human beings and can be nurtured or stymied. So I very much believe that everybody has creativity, just like everybody has intelligence. And we now believe that, as you probably know very well, that intelligence is not a fixed amount. You might be born with certain propensities to be intelligent, but what you come out with is a combination of what you're born with and your experiences that develop. And the same is what we believe about creativity. Everybody's born with some creativity, and we can all either nurture or increase our creativity or block it. And I'm hoping as educators, you'll be people who will want to increase creativity. For many of us, creativity is not developed very much And I saw this little cartoon. I thought it was funny because we start off as children. We're so creative. We play, we draw, we write, we have role-playing, we do experiments. And then when we get older, we are pretty much given up most of that. And my most creative idea might be, what kind of a font am I going to use? So I think for many of us, it would be good if we can find that childhood creativity again. Some people believe that there are levels of creativity. So, for example, when I say everybody's creative, but most of us will agree that there are some people who are much more creative than others. So, some people talk about big C and little c. And big C would be things like famous painting, works of genius, symphony, a cure for cancer, those kinds of things. Little c creativity is the creativity we use every day to solve our problems. And for example, if you're working parents, you know it takes creativity to come home from a long day at work and fix a nutritious meal for your family and figure out what can I fix today that will be good and that they'll eat and that I might have some things at hand. So we are all creative every day in little ways and sometimes some of us in big ways. Another way of looking at creativity is on inventive creativity is the kind that solves a worthwhile problem with a novel and appropriate solution. So that is what we think of more as scientific creativity, industrial creativity, innovation. Then there is expressive creativity, and that's what we find in the arts. And the purpose of that is not as much to solve a problem, but to express the creator's emotions and aesthetics. So for inventive creativity, we're typically more interested in a novel and appropriate solution, and for expressive creativity, something that's original and valuable. However, these two can be more alike than this dichotomy seems to indicate, because for most of us, if we have a solution and it is not an elegant solution to a problem, we won't necessarily think it's a good solution. And many of you I know, I heard use iPhones, iPads, etc. A lot of people believe that the reason Apple has been so successful is because not only did they use inventive creativity to try to come up with new products, but that Steve Jobs was very concerned about design and the look of things. So he included both inventive and expressive creativity, which made people buy the products, I think. Okay, before we go to the next part, why should we develop creativity? Does anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, so we'll just go then. Why should schools develop creativity? Well, one reason is for the good of the society. Recent reports warn that a nation cannot retain its economic and scientific edge in the competitive world with a workforce that has mastered only minimum competencies. And so I put up there some of the books and reports that have come out. A book by Friedman, who's an economist, saying the world is flat, The Rise of the Creative Class, and the Creative Economy. And I know that some of you know all too well the impact on the economy lately, because many people are suffering with some of the difficult times in the economy. And we know that the way that our societies as a whole, our world society, as well as each country or each region, has to depend on our most creative people to solve our problems so that we can go on and continue to be successful. So you definitely want to teach your children to think creatively and try to solve problems. But also, a recent report in Business Week said that they surveyed 1,500 chief executives from all over the world, and I think it was about 16 countries, I can't remember, but IBM conducted it, and they asked these chief executive officers what would be the most important thing they would look for in employees, and they said creativity was the most important thing. So another point is that when you develop creativity, you prepare your students for the job world of the future. The song is playing because I don't know how to stop it right now until I go on. But, oops, I'm going. The other point is creativity in all domains improves our lives. So beautiful architecture, art, food, dance, advances in science and mathematics, in medicine, all of this comes from creativity of people that enriches all of us. And it's for the good of the individual. We know that creativity maximizes human abilities. Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Also, there has been research to say that creativity promotes mental health. By encouraging the creative expression of emotions, we give students a healthy outlet for fear, anger, frustration, stress, as well as the positive ones like joy and love, etc. And I'll take just a second to tell a personal story that indicates why I believe in this so much. When my kids were little, of course, I very much encouraged them to express their creativity, and my daughter learned when she was upset to write about it. She would write about things that upset her. Well, when she was in 10th grade, one of her friends, a little girl in 9th grade, 14-year-old girl, committed suicide. It was a horrible thing for her. And she didn't really know how to process this terrible loss. And of course, like most people who are close to someone who commits suicide, she had a lot of feelings mixed of grief and guilt, etc. But because all her life she had been writing when she was sad, she learned to write, and she wrote about it, and she went to school and she got other kids to get a big sheet of paper and write stories about the friend and memories of the friend, etc., that they gave to the mother. And my daughter made a website, and she put pictures of her friend and put a lot of their stories and memories and things about the friend. So, and then went to the mother's house and with the mother planted a garden in memory of her friend. My point is that because she had these ways of expressing her grief and her anger and her guilt, she did it in ways that she was able to get it out. And I think more kids, if they did that, they wouldn't go to drugs and alcohol and other behaviors, fighting when they have stress in their lives and sorrow. My daughter's now working on a PhD in creative writing, so maybe I encouraged her to write a little bit too much because now she'll always be poor, but anyway. So, if I have convinced you that creativity is a good thing to teach your students, then I want to talk to you about some things you can do. And I thought about this because I realized you're educators from many different countries. You probably teach students of different ages and different content areas. So I wanted to pick some things that everybody could use. So I tried to do this, and I hope I succeeded. 5 things. So the first thing that you can do any teacher can do is to provide a creative environment. Now, you might think that that means, sorry, I had to get a drink of water. You might think that that means an expensive environment, that you have to have a lot of materials, and that's not the most important thing. Although, of course, it's nice if students have different materials to experiment with. But one of the most important things is the psychological safety, and that's on the right-hand side. For students to know, as we talked about, it's okay to fail, and sometimes you even learn from failure, but nobody comes up with anything original if they're afraid to take a chance and fail. That students know that sometimes strange or crazy ideas turn out to be good ideas, and that doing things in a different way is necessary sometimes, and also that trying hard and working at something is fun. So that does not cost anything. If you can create psychological safety in your class, you're doing more for those students to promote their creativity than probably anything else. And I'll tell you just again a little quick story of when I was teaching. I was hired to teach in this middle school, and I was working with very bright students, gifted students. And middle school is 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And here, it is often a very, very difficult time for students because, you know, teenagers, adolescents, they're very self-conscious, but they also can be very critical of each other, and it's a difficult time in many ways. So I went into the classroom, and I saw immediately that students were sometimes making fun of each other, or they would make jokes, but they were cruel jokes. They were cutting each other. So I realized that the first thing I had to do before I could teach anything else was to change the environment. And in fact, I even told the principal, who said, "Oh, what are your goals for the first 6th grade?" Because I said, my goal is to make a psychologically safe environment. And he said, "That's all you're going to do?" I said, "No, I'm going to teach, but that's my primary goal. And if I do that, then I can teach successfully the rest of the year." And what I did, it wouldn't necessarily be the best thing for everybody, but what I did is I created a lesson on Greek mythology, by the way, where the students had to act it out. I used the idea of role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, but I changed it, and each student was a character, and I took them on the 12 trials of Hercules, and they had to solve problems. But what happened is if they didn't work together, if they were nasty to somebody or whatever, their character got killed. Now, that might sound pretty cruel to kill somebody, but of course it was just their character, and they would get another character, but their character would start off at a low level with low strength and low money and everything, so they didn't want that. So they learned pretty quickly that to succeed, they had to cooperate, and they had to be kind. So it was a great way for me to get them to work together and be kind to each other. The other bonus of that was I told them if they didn't come to class, that their character would have to be in the front. Nobody wants their character to be what they say the door opener, because, you know, if the Nemean lion is there and they go into the cave first, they're the one that's going to be attacked or whatever. So they never wanted to miss my class. And in fact, I had one little boy, and his father wanted to take him to the dentist, and he told his son, you can miss your morning class because you have a dentist appointment. I'll just take you to school after the dentist appointment. The little boy said, "Oh, no, Miss Cramond will kill me." And his father thought he was speaking metaphorically, of course. And when he brought him to school, he told me that. And I said, "No, it's true. If children miss my class, they often die." So it also got them to come to class all of the time and on time. So anyway, But however you do it, to promote a psychologically safe environment where there is no tolerance for bullying does amazing things for creativity. So the other thing, and on the left you see three headings: resources, personal motivation, exploration. That comes from a Swedish researcher who looked at what kind of a work environment promotes innovation. And he developed this guideline, and he said an ideal work environment for innovation provides resources, and the resources don't have to be money and materials. Of course, those are nice, but idea time, idea support, challenge, and involvement. And we need to provide those things for our students, too. Idea time means, and I was telling my graduate students at the university this last night, that so often educators think you have to just bombard students with information and activities, and we don't give them time to process it. And a very good educator from a long time ago named Hilda Taba said all lessons should have a rhythm, and there should be excitement and learning, and there should be quiet time, which is processing and thinking. And I think that's true in any situation. If you want people to have ideas, they have to have quiet time. So, we don't come up with ideas when we're in the middle of doing something. We come up with ideas when we're taking a shower or when we're driving, which is doing something. Doesn't take all of our attention. Okay, the second big component of the creative environment is personal motivation. And there has to be, and this is where the psychological safety comes in, there has to be trust and openness, that students can trust they will not be ridiculed if they try something and it doesn't work, or if they have a good idea. That playfulness and humor are important, and absence of interpersonal conflict. So these three things are also go into the psychological safety. And then the third big component is risk-taking. Students feel like sometimes they can try something different. And I'm careful to tell my students, look, there are times to be creative and there are times not to be. If you're trying to solve a quadratic equation, you don't have to be creative. It's much easier to use the formula that has been developed. But if you have a problem for which there's not a known solution, then you can be creative. So also debates about issues and freedom. So part of it is, as you see, unconditional acceptance and respect, and for you to model creative dispositions, trying to be creative and think of new ideas. Whoa, I know, I'm talking to you a lot, but if you have questions, I'm happy to stop. And I found this is part of a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, an American poet and short story writer that some of you may know about. And he wrote, alone, from childhood's hour, I have not been as others were, I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. And I chose this poem because I think it illustrates how many highly creative children feel. We've been talking about creativity for everybody, and I certainly do believe in developing creativity in everybody. But there are some people, highly creative students, who are very sensitive, realize they're different from others, and have this feeling of being different and alone. And so it's also important for us to make them feel accepted. And I think this is a big issue for a lot of students, too. Okay, so the first thing I told you to do, you can create an environment in your classroom that shows unconditional respect and acceptance, and then, nurture students' creativity, show them that you value it. So the second thing you can do is to recognize creative students. So how do you recognize creativity in students? Well, a lot of my students, anyway, if I say to them, who's creative, they always think of artists or maybe musicians, and they'll say Picasso and Mozart and things like that. But they don't think about the fact that creativity can be expressed in anything that human beings can do. You can be a very creative factory worker and figure out ways to keep your mind occupied and maybe even make your job a little more interesting. So one thing you should do is be not only tolerant but accepting of differences as possible strengths. That sometimes students who are creative are a little bit different. And we want to encourage them. So here are some of the characteristics of creative people. And what I wanted to show is some of these characteristics can be seen in a positive way, but they might also be seen as negative. For example, we say creative people are open, but the negative of that is some people see them as indecisive. They're curious, but you might think they're nosy. They're risk-taking in being inventive and trying new ideas, but they can also be risk-taking in dangerous ways. They often have a strong self-concept. If their creativity survives, they've got to have a strong self-concept. Because Paul Florence, who was my mentor, always said, as soon as you have a creative idea, you are a minority of one, because you're the only person with that original idea. So you have to have a pretty strong sense of your idea being a good one to withstand all of the people who are going to tell you it's not good. But sometimes people can see that as being egotistical. Another really important characteristic of creative people who hold on to their creativity is persistence. If you think about how hard some people work to get their work out there, some that come to mind for me are, of course, like Van Gogh, who continued to paint, although he only sold one painting in his lifetime, and that was to his brother, or some writers who continue to send their manuscripts even though they're turned down many times, or scientists who work for years and years and years on the same problem. There has to be a certain amount of persistence, not to give up immediately. But some people can see that as stubbornness. Another thing that a lot of creative people have very high energy. Now, that doesn't mean they're highly energetic all of the time, but they can be very high energy, especially when they are working on something that they're interested in. And so, for example, I know that Thomas Edison and also Nikola Tesla, slept very little. And I read that when they were working together, that they would often work for days at a time without rest because they were so excited about what they were working on, but the other people in the lab were passing out from fatigue. So creative people can have these bursts of high energy, and I would guess that all of you have probably experienced this. Csikszentmihalyi called it flow, when you're working on something and you forget about eating or sleeping and lose track of time. But for children, this high energy can sometimes be seen as hyperactivity, and I think that can be a problem for them. Another one is, I think this is interesting, daydreaming. Very creative people can get lost in thought, but also daydream can look like you're just not paying attention and not interested. The creative people are very individualistic, but they can be seen as different or odd. They're spontaneous, which can look like impulsivity, and they're emotionally sensitive, but that can look like they're immature or too emotional and sensitive. So many of these things have two sides, and as we as teachers can see some of these behaviors as indicative of creative potential and not always negative. And in some cases, the very qualities that cause creative individuals to have problems are the same ones that may facilitate their creative accomplishments. So we have a cartoon strip in the United States. I don't know if you get this one. It's called Calvin and Hobbes. And I just want to tell you a little bit of background. Calvin is the little boy that you see in the picture. And Calvin is this very creative little boy, high energy, and he's always getting into things. And he has a tiger, which I might have another cartoon with the tiger. I don't know if I put it in or not. And it's a little stuffed tiger, but he imagines it as real. So this little boy has a very, very good imagination. And the question is, you know, when is it energy and when is it hyperactivity? So here in this cartoon, you see Calvin is swinging, and the bell rings. It's time to go back into class, but Calvin keeps on swinging. So the little girl says, didn't you hear the bell? Recess is over. It's time to go in. And Calvin says, I'm not done yet. It takes me more than one recess to wear myself into a state of submission. So for some children, I guess that's how they feel about school, and they have a lot of energy. Okay, here's another Calvin comic. And Calvin, I said, is a very imaginative little boy. And you can see in the first panel, Calvin is visualizing this prehistoric scene with this pteranodon flying. Some people do know Calvin and Hobbes. I'm glad. But I think he's a very good example of a creative child. And then he's seeing this sea monster comes out of the water and is attacking the pteranodon, and he all of a sudden hears, Calvin, pay attention. And he looks, and there is the teacher. And she says, we're studying geography. Now, what state do you live in? And he says, denial. And she says, sigh, I don't suppose I can argue with that. So Calvin is very creative, and he's inattentive, but he's inattentive because he's so imaginative. And some creative children are like that. And the last one is impulsivity or spontaneity. And now you see Calvin's stuffed animal, tiger, that he imagines to be real. And that's Hobbes. And Hobbes says, do you have an idea for your project yet? No, I'm waiting for inspiration. You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. And what mood is that? Last minute panic. So these are just a few examples of Calvin and Hobbes and showing the characteristics which can be creative characteristics that can also get kids into trouble in school. All right. So the third, and I know I'm trying to watch the time too because I know we have limited time. But like I said, if we don't get through everything, I hope Irene can share the PowerPoint with you, or I can in some way. Okay.
Everything, but just to say, I mean, it's up to you. You can take as many as you want. We are all hearing, and if you can see the chat, we are having a really good discussion on all the things that you're saying there. So it's really a very live environment, and I think that we are really all enjoying it very, very much.
Oh, so good. Well, thanks,
Okay.
Okay. So the third thing so I said first you can create the right environment. The second thing is that you can look for creativity in students, and even though the behaviors might sometimes look like negative behaviors, they might also be indicative of potential. And then the third thing you can do, involve students in problem solving of all types and in all content areas. So, that means actively teaching students how to think, teaching them the types of thinking and problem solving in all subjects, and the languages of problem solving. Now, I'm going to give you some examples in just a minute, but I've done this even with graduate students. They have a preferred method. For example, some students are very verbal, so they'll try to solve any problem verbally, even if that's not the most appropriate way. Or they'll try to solve a problem mathematically, etc. So it's very important with children to teach them to look at a problem carefully and decide what language to use, verbal, mathematical, is it best to make a figure, to model it, and then to use that. And how to be metacognitive and strategic. Another thing is to model problem solving, to seek out problems, and to talk to the students about how you solve problems. I think too often people don't try to look at things as possible problems that can be solved, and they get caught in these, confrontations. A real simple example is I was trying to go, I was at the airport and I was trying to get on a plane, and there was a woman in front of me and she had a container of food, and the TSA agent told her she couldn't take the container. Okay. So she started arguing with him that she had to take this food, that she couldn't eat the food that was on the plane, and then he's arguing, that she can't take it, and I could see that this was going to go on, and it was ridiculous because, of course, she wasn't going to win the argument, but she wasn't backing down. So I just tapped her on the shoulder, and I said, you know what? He doesn't have a problem with the lentils. It's because it's got liquid. If you would go over there to the restroom and drain the liquid, you could get on the plane with your lentils. And she looked at the TSA agent, and she said, is that true? And he said, yes. And it was such a simple solution, but these two people were standing there arguing. I'm thinking, I'm going to miss my plane. He didn't say to her that, just drain it. She didn't think about that. They just were going to argue instead of looking for a solution. So I think one of the things is to help students look at things as solvable and try to solve them. And then teach them how to evaluate their problem solving and discover blocks to their thinking. So I'm going to show you some of these in the next few minutes. If we have time, I'll show you as many as I can. So the first thing is teaching them about using different problems. So a person by the name of June Maker, some of you know her, I'm sure, has done this visual of different kinds of problems. Of course, this isn't the only way to categorize problems, but I like the way she did it. And you see at the bottom of the slide, I have the website for her information that you can go to it. But I love this because she talks about the fact that in our schools, most of the problems that we give students are that first type. We know what the problem is, and the student knows what the problem is. We know what method the student's supposed to use to solve the problem. The student knows what method to use to solve the problem. But the only thing is we know the solution or the answer, and the student doesn't. So most of everything is known, and the student has to use the method to come up with a solution. We also use the second kind sometimes, which is when, again, both student and teacher know what the problem is, but the teacher knows what method should be used. The student doesn't necessarily know. Of course, again, the teacher knows the solution and the student has to come up with it. The third type is when both know this problem. There are a range of methods that the teacher knows could be used to solve the problem. The student doesn't know what to use, and there are a range of solutions. And that's a more open-ended kind of problem. The fourth kind, which is very rarely used in schools at all, is when both know the problem but neither know the method or the solution. That's a very open-ended problem because we don't know what the solution is. And then the last kind is when we don't even know what the problem is. And I think that's an interesting thing because the most successful problem solvers are people who are good at finding problems. They find problems that other people haven't recognized as problems yet or haven't thought about as problems to solve. So here's an example of what she tried to show, Maker tried to show, is the types of problems and how they are in education. So you can see that most of what we do in education would be in type 1, type 2, and type 3 problems. Type 4 and type 5 problems are what we face in the real world, right? We have a problem, we don't even know exactly what the problem is sometimes, or definitely how to solve it. And future problem solving is one program that does really get students to do more type 4 and type 5 problems, and I'll tell you about that one in a minute, and problem-based learning. Those are even a little higher level than most self-directed and project-based learning. But it shows how we need to move students from the type 1 and type 2 problems because the problems they face in the real world are not going to be like that. They're going to be less direct. I had an experience talking about, experiences working with the School of Engineering here at my university and the art department. And we worked together to create a curriculum for the engineering students that incorporated creativity and art with engineering. And one of the things they had to do was learn how to find problems and then what method to use to come up with an answer. And at the end of the semester, the students had to present their projects to the rest of the engineering faculty, some of whom were quite skeptical about us putting creativity and art into engineering. And it was very interesting to see that one of the engineering students got up, and as he started to present his group's project, he said, well, we were not really given a problem. We were given a situation, and we had to figure out what the problem was. And I know that in real life, when I'm an engineer, my client will give me the problem. And one of the senior engineer faculty jumped up and he said, no, you're wrong. In real life as an engineer, your client may give you the problem, but it may not be the real problem. It may not be the best problem. It may not be the root problem. If you have learned how to find the problem in this class, then that's the most valuable thing you can learn as an engineer. And I loved it because he wasn't working with us on the project, but he valued that. So he really showed them that that was worthwhile. You want to go to the next slide? So you can teach students to find problems by looking for gaps in knowledge, asking questions, formulating hypotheses, challenging assumptions, accepting that knowledge is transitory. I think that's one of the things I didn't learn as a child. I thought whatever we learned in books, that was true and it was true forever. And, it's been real interesting to me that I grew up and I found out all of a sudden Pluto wasn't a planet anymore. We went from 9 planets to 8. And then I hear recently it's been put back. So we might be back at 9 planets. That's a simple thing, but so much of what we once knew, especially if you're as old as I am, is no longer true. And other information we've learned. So students need to learn that knowledge is transitory and that new knowledge can come and replace the old. And then they need to learn how to word the problems for a task and how to work on them. So, how do you do all of this? Well, one thing that I highly recommend if you're not involved is the Future Problem Solving Program. the Future Problem Solving Program was in one of the former slides. It is an international program. I know Turkey is participating now. I don't know what other of your countries. I would have to look it up. But it's a program that teaches students how to find and address real problems, how to think, not what to think, and how to be engaged in and empowered to solve community and world problems. So I really urge you to look into it. The program it's a nonprofit organization, but if you want your students to compete, you do have to pay. But you can do future problem solving without registering a team to compete, and you can find out about it. So I'll have to put the URL. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I think I can, let's see. I can annotate. Okay. Did I go back to the first slide all of a sudden? Okay, that's not going to work. Sorry. That didn't work. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Somebody just put the, it's now called the Future Problem Solving Program International. And really the emphasis is on teaching students how to think about problems and find problems and think of creative solutions. And the problems are in that they're given, if you participate in the program, they're given problems in different areas. However, you can use the process in any class, and there are certainly many problems that you can identify in any content area. For example, I was in Korea working with teachers from Korea, teaching them this method because they wanted to bring creativity into their science classes. And I said, this is great for science. And they said, well, where will we get a problem? And I just picked up the newspaper from that day, and one of the headlines was about childhood obesity has now become a problem in Korea. And so I said, that's a problem. That's something you could deal with in science and talk about. Another thing that was in the paper was about global warming and the fact that farmers in Korea, who for years and years and years had grown certain crops, were finding that with global warming, the growing areas were changing in Korea, and they were going to have to switch to crops that they didn't know as much about. So, you know, all of these are big problems that students could take on and search what is the key problem here. Is the key problem teaching farmers to change their crops, or is the key problem trying to do something about global warming? And there are many issues within any of those. So that's a very good program, and I like it for people who say, I don't know how to begin to do it, because it is structured in it, and you can find ways to teach these things. And in any different kids of almost any age. It goes, the competition, it's on this page. No, it's not. The competition only begins in 4th grade, but there are activities to teach children from as early as kindergarten or 1st grade how to do that. I think some other good programs for teaching students about finding and solving problems are invention programs, and there are a lot of them. We have Invent America, but anybody could use the process. There's Kids Invent Now, and then there's the Lemelson Center Smithsonian, and then really for older kids, I think, Dean Kamen's First. And if you're not familiar with the name Dean Kamen, he's an incredible inventor. He's the man who invented the Segway, and he invented a wheelchair that can go downstairs, and he has over 1,000 inventions. But I think these programs are also good programs for helping students find problems and try to address them. I didn't say this, but just to say the Future Problem Solving program also has a component that's a community problem solving, where students identify a problem in their communities and try to work on it. So One thing, for example, I've done with students is say, to teach them about different kinds of problems, is I present them with problems. And I say, how would you solve them? And what I tell them is, I don't want the solution, and that's surprising to them because usually teachers just want the solution. I just want them to think about what method would they use. So I'll say something like, okay, here's a problem. Should elderly parents be moved into a special home where they can receive care, or should they be cared for by the family? And so I'll say, well, how would you solve that problem? Most people would say that's a moral, maybe a cultural, ethical, emotional problem, values problem. Sometimes it's an economic problem, but usually it's not a mathematical problem. It could be if it's economics, so how do you solve that? Then the next one you can see is a typical mathematical problem. They should know that you solve that with a formula. Then the third one is an example. What is the solution to the current global financial crisis? Should wealthier countries help those with weaker economies? Oh, okay, I know that's a pretty sensitive topic in Europe right now. And again, how do you solve that problem? Well, some people might say, again, it's a cultural or a value problem. Some people might say it's a mathematical problem. And some people might say it's a problem that requires creative problem solving. What can we do? And maybe we need to think of a solution that no one has thought of yet. And then here's another one. This is a logic problem, and you've all probably seen these where somebody says, I'm going to paint a dot on your forehead, and then I'm not going to go through it now, but most students will recognize this is a logic problem, and one of the best ways to solve this problem for most people would be visually or with a model of some type. I'm seeing people are writing they're having trouble hearing. Should I stop, or can people hear me, or?
Well, it's okay, Bonnie.
I'm okay? All right.
Okay.
All right. And then another kind of logic problem, which is, some of you may have seen these are called stories with holes. Just to go through this one. Brad stared through the dirty, soot-smeared window on the 22nd floor of the office tower. Overcome with depression, he slid the window open and jumped through it. It was a sheer drop to the ground. Miraculously, after he landed, he was unhurt. Since there was nothing to cushion his fall or slow his descent, how could he have survived the fall? And of course, this is a problem that is solved by students realizing that they've made an assumption. And so that's also another kind of logic, and just let the answer to it, some of you may have figured out, but he was a window cleaner. So, but it's, what do you assume about it? So I like to give students many kinds of problems and teach them about choosing the rest one. Now, I think everybody could participate in this. If you take just a minute, use your imagination, and imagine a sheet of paper. Now, I have U.S.-sized paper, but you could imagine your A4 paper, I think you use in Europe. Just imagine a regular sheet of notebook paper, and imagine folding it in half so that it is twice as thick. Now, imagine folding it in half again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, again. Okay, how many sheets thick is the paper? Okay, so how did you solve that problem? You probably solved that problem visually and mathematically, right? But the answer is, that's right, you cannot fold the paper that many times. If you take a sheet of paper and try, you'll see that there's a point way before the end of this where you have to stop folding because it just won't work. So I tell my students, this is a case where visualization or mathematics will give you the wrong answer. You actually have to try it to find out that, no. How many sheets thick is it? Well, you would have had to stop folding, so it wouldn't work. And this is something I use to show students that they have to think about what method they use. Okay. So I've told you 3 things you can do. 1, create a creative environment. 2, recognize and value creative students. And 3, help students learn how to find and solve problems and be aware of the methods that they use to solve different kinds of problems. The 4th thing you can do is to promote creative and innovative dispositions. And dispositions are something that are very important for us in schools in the United States. We're supposed to measure these in our students and in our future teachers. And there are many different lists of these, but I think this was one I thought was good. The overarching disposition of thinkers is mindfulness. And I was talking about that, for example, in the problem solving, being very mindful of how you solve problems. It includes openness to new information, cultivated awareness of more than one perspective, tolerance for ambiguity, and preference for novelty, complexity, and incongruity. So if we can help our students to have these kinds of problem-solving dispositions, we help them to be more creative. Can we teach dispositions? Well, most of the research says that dispositions are learned through enculturation. So, in other words, we create a thinking culture in our classroom, and we do that by modeling thinking, by explaining good thinking strategies and approaches, by giving students opportunities to use their reasoning and discuss it, and giving them feedback about the thinking, that it's supported, encouraged, and valued. In the class I told you about that we worked with art, creativity, and engineering, our students at first were very frustrated because we spent several weeks on finding problems and thinking about how we would solve them and not wanting solutions. And they were so, you don't want my answer? No, we want to know how you would solve this problem. But it was important for them to become aware of that and not focus just on getting to the answer as they were used to doing. And I have some resources listed there. I'm sorry, I don't think I put the resource page at the back, but I could provide them if you want. Okay, so students have to be taught to be metacognitive, meaning aware of their thinking, and reflective. So I try to teach students to first look at the problem and think about what type of problem it is, consider whether it's a variation on a problem they already know how to solve, choose a strategy to solve it, and sometimes choose what language to use, numbers, words, pictures, values, actions, modeling, whatever, and then monitor how successfully you are solving the problem. If the strategy doesn't seem to be effective, go back to step 1, because some people just keep persisting in trying to solve the problem in the same way. And then here's the last one. The last thing that I would say teachers can do is use established creative thinking techniques. And so there are many of these. One book that I found really helpful, and you notice my name is not on it, so I'm not getting any money from this, but it's just one. There are many. And this book was by, goodbye Olympia, by Robert and Michelle Ruth Bernstein. And the name of the book is Sparks of Genius, the 13 Thinking Tools of the World's Most Creative People. Robert Ruth Bernstein won a MacArthur Genius Award. I don't know if you've heard of these, but there's a foundation in the United States that gives these awards. You can't apply for it. They choose people who are doing things that they find to be very innovative, and they award money to the people to do their work. And it can be in many different fields. It's in the sciences and arts, music, whatever. Well, Robert and Michelle Ruth Bernstein interviewed people at the top of their fields, in many different fields, in the arts, in mathematics, in science, all kinds of fields. And what they concluded is that creativity has some basic processes that are the same no matter what field. And they refine this down to 13 processes. And you can see those 13 processes there. And the book goes on to talk about how you can develop those processes. And obviously, we don't have time to do that here. But if you think about teaching students clearly how to use these different thinking processes, that's one good way to help students be more creative. And one activity I've used with students, and I'm going to finish this in just a few minutes because I know people are leaving and you have other things to do, but just give you a couple of ideas. One is abstracting. Oftentimes, very bright people don't have a problem telling you in many words or writing in many words their ideas, but they have a more difficult time being succinct and saying something in just a few words or writing something in a few words. So one activity is to have students write their life in 6 words. And I've had my students do that. It could be something else. But this is an easy one. Sum up your life in 6 words. If you have a pencil, you might try it yourself. It's up to you. And what is interesting about it is that people do this in many different ways. And there's not a wrong way. But I'm going to show you, these are great activities, and there is competition every year, and it's on, you can put your classes in the competition. But I've had my students do it, and here are some examples of some people's summary of their lives. This one, crawl, step, run, step, crawl, lay. As you can see, this one just did a progression, which is great. I like this one, broke, payday, broke, payday, broke, payday. Or this one, of course, you don't have to just use step, like coffee, kids, work, coffee, broke. Didn't do what I should have. California, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Manhattan, Vancouver, Seattle. Half over, but feels like new. And you can see some of these people use different words. Some people express an idea, different things. This one I like too. Child, adult, wife, mom, widow, me. And then don't even try to plan it. Funny. Okay. Another activity is just suppose. And I just tried to use one from a subject area, economics. If you told students, just suppose you won the lottery, what would you do with the money? Everybody can think about that. Many people have thought of that. But then if you say, what might some of the effects be? What would be some results? Good. Yes, if you do this with a class, so often if they keep continuing to think about what happens as a result, it can be a very interesting discussion for them to think creatively about possibilities. Or in science, if we said, just suppose we could cure all diseases, what would be the effect? And to think about that. There's one I've done with my class a lot, and I have them first think about, in a perfect world, what would life be like? And they finish that sentence. It's very open-ended. So they can say whatever. In a perfect world, there'd be no hunger. In a perfect world, nobody would bully anybody else in a perfect world, whatever. And then after they do that and we share that, then I have them think about what would be the effect if that happened. Very often they decide there is no perfect world because there would be some bad consequences. Or mathematics. Just suppose you could invent your own symbol system for mathematics. What might be symbols you would create and what would they mean? So those are some ideas. Another, and some of you probably know this strategy, but I think it's an effective one, is scamper. And if you're stuck for ideas, it's a mnemonic, that's a nice Greek word, to teach students easy to think of ideas. If you can't think of an idea, substitute, combine, adapt, magnify or minify, put to other uses, eliminate, reverse, or rearrange. And I've had students many times not be able to think of something and then use the first letters of scamper to help them come up with an idea. And, for example, we've done this before. What are some ways we can make zoos better for animals? And I won't go through all of it, but, substituting, group the animals and vegetation together as in the wild and let them hunt or forage. All of these, adapt it, minify. I thought it would be interesting if they made zoos larger with more space, or if they would breed smaller versions of animals so the space seems larger. And then it goes on, put to other uses, eliminate, reverse, or rearrange. Okay, so you could use scamper with language arts to change a familiar story by substituting, combining, adapting, etc., or use the ideas to create a new society, or we should write word problems using the ideas of scamper, or design a new experiment in science. Metaphorical thinking is one, and I know most of you know. What is life like? Here's an example. It's a jigsaw puzzle, but you don't have the picture on the front of the box to know what it's supposed to look like. Sometimes you're not even sure you have all the pieces. Life is like riding an elevator. It has a lot of ups and downs, and someone's always pushing your buttons. Sometimes you get the shaft, but what bothers you are the jerks. So I think looking at things from a different perspective, choose one. 7 and 4 are having an argument. Using mathematical knowledge, create the argument. And I've had students say things like, 4 telling 7, I'm supposed to be ahead of you in the number line, or 7 telling 4, you're a lesser person than I am, whatever. Or, creating a conversation between a bee and a flower. So I'm going to skip just through this because we are running late and just say that so many problems in nature were solved by looking at so many problems in our world were solved by looking at how nature solved the problem. So teaching students to look for how solutions are addressed in nature. And one way to do this, I love 6 hats. I love 6 hats. Somebody asked that. I just picked a few and didn't put 6 hats. But another one I like is force fit, trying to force 2 things. And you can pick 2 things in any way. Like putting concepts, pictures, or numerals on cards and having students choose 2 to make a comparison. Like life is like a book, how? Life is like an animal, how? Anything like that. Those are good, too, to get students to think creatively. They have to think of similarities. There's 6 hats. And I won't go through this since apparently you all know about 6 hats and won't go. So, I'm ending it now, and the last thing is lagniappe. That's a word we use in Louisiana where I'm from, and it means a little bit something extra. And I'm going to end it with a story. And this is a story, it's a short story, don't worry, it won't take too long, of a sad bear, an allegory on the school experience of a creative child. And this was originally published in the Journal of Creative Behavior. Once upon a time, there was a very sad bear who was kept in a very small cage at the town zoo. When he wasn't eating or sleeping, he spent his time pacing, 8 paces forward and 8 paces back. Again and again, he paced the cage. One day, the zookeeper said, "It's sad to see this bear pacing back and forth. I'll build him a great open space where he can run and play." And so he did. As the space was completed, great waves of anticipation charged through the town. Finally, the magic day came to move the bear to his headquarters. The mayor gave a speech as the children screamed with excitement. The town band played loudly as the great beast was moved to his new large space. Everyone watched as the bear looked to the left, then to his right, and began to move. 1 step, 2, 5, 8 paces forward and 8 back again. To the shocked amazement of the crowd, he paced the parameters of his old, very small cage. Minds like theirs grow accustomed to narrow spaces. Let's not combine the tubs. Okay, we got through it all. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer a couple of questions if anybody has time, but I realize we've gone over time and most of you probably have things to do and places to go, but
I just want to thank you, Bonnie. I think it was one of the most inspiring. I think that all of the experts that we had so far. And we really got great ideas, and they kept saying, "Oh, we have to try this, and we have to try that," and you can see the comments are coming very quickly there. I don't know if there are people who want to add something. I know that we were interacting all the time during your talk, so this was really nice.
Well, good. Well, thank you, and I'm sorry we didn't have a little more discussion time, but I thought maybe they wanted some information, and so good. All the best to all of you, and thank you for inviting me. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you once again. So, and have a good evening, Cole, and good afternoon, Bonnie.
Thank you. More than that.